Okay, so one theory for motivation or for what motivates our behavior is instinct theory, which was proposed by William James in the 19th century. This theory basically suggests that our behavior is driven by instincts. Okay, so instincts are motivating our behaviors. That then raises the question, what are instincts? So instincts or instinctive behaviors are behaviors that are genetically programmed. So they're biological, they're innate, we're born with them. They are specific to members of a species and they usually aid in survival. So basically, James compiled a list of these instincts that he thought were driving behavior, and that included physical instincts such as sucking, and then mental instincts such as things like curiosity and jealousy. Some other things he included, as we've got here, so we've got mother's protection of her baby, the urge to lick sugar. I mentioned curiosity and jealousy. We then got cleanliness. So these are some of the things that he labeled as instincts. Now, over the years, different psychologists have added to this list of instincts, and actually, Freud was a big proponent of instinct theory, but he looked at it a little bit differently. He proposed that human behavior is primarily motivated by sexual and aggressive instincts, which we'll look at in another chapter. As much as this theory may be able to explain certain aspects of behavior or certain motivations for behavior, this theory has received a lot of criticism. So one problem with this theory is that there's little evidence that some of these things are really instincts. So for example, it makes sense perhaps that the mother's protection of her baby is an instinct because that's going to help the baby to survive, but something such as cleanliness, there's really no evidence that that is an instinctive behavior. Or things like curiosity or jealousy. You know, what makes them instinctive, we don't know. Now, another criticism is that explaining behavior using instincts is just a way of describing it. It's not actually explaining it. So in other words, saying that a person cleans because we have an instinct to clean doesn't actually explain why we have that instinct. Now we can reason, and if you think about it, being clean helps to protect us against viruses and bacterial infections and things, so it's helping us to survive. But simply saying that it's an instinct is not actually explaining why we have that behavior. Another criticism is that if instinct theory really did explain all of human behavior, then our behavior would all be a lot more similar than it actually is. So in other words, instinct theory cannot explain the variation that we see in people. So if cleanliness is meant to be an instinct, then surely lots of people, or the majority of people, would be very conscious about being clean. But that's not what we see. We see huge amounts of variation in people's level of cleanliness. And that this theory doesn't explain that. It lastly has been criticized because it ignores the role of learning and culture in shaping human behavior. Clearly, we know, based on the research that we now have, culture and our learning experiences play a huge role in shaping our behavior. And that's another theory we'll look at in a little bit. But this theory ignores the role that those factors play.